This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Welcome to episode 52. And in this episode, I look to shatter the myth that mental toughness is all about gritting it out, keeping your head down, and keeping going. It's far more than that. And these three guests that I've interviewed go on to explain that it's also very important to learn more about yourself so that you can go on to make better decisions under pressure. And it's also very important to learn more about yourself so that you free yourself up when you play your sport, your golf, or your life for that matter, so that you can take the bull by the horns and do things on your terms, even in the face of challenges, difficulties, setbacks. And despite this episode being focused towards golf, the messages do relate to life, to sport, or to business professionals. And we'll get on pretty quickly with this show. First up is Gio Valiante, who tells us about why knowing your why, so why you play your sport or your golf, is so important, and how golf, how sport, can go on to expose you. Obviously, the book is called Fearless Golf that you wrote many years ago. You talked there about fear, and I suppose, what common themes do you see in golfers when they approach you? What type of fears do they tend to show?
Well, it's interesting, and this happened as recently as yesterday and the day before. What happens is, and this is why the book Fearless Golf came into being, is as I was interviewing and studying golfers, I came to realize that fear was such a common theme, and you wouldn't think it because it's not like it's football or boxing, like no one's physically getting hurt. So the question became like, why is there so much fear in the game of golf? Why do golfers keep coming to me saying, hey, I'm nervous, or I get tremors or shaky, or I'm afraid to go play, or I'm afraid to play? And so it was just such a recurring theme. And not only recurring, I came to believe that it's actually universal, right? That fear is a universal experience in golf, such that every golfer you talk to at some point or another has experienced fear on some level. But what's interesting is when people come to me, they don't know why they're afraid. Right? They just know that they're afraid, but they don't necessarily know why. And so in walking them through the process of how we create fear in golf, why it's so universal, you can start to uncover some of their own mental habits that they create by their own mental habits and their approach to the game. For example, I break down in Fearless Golf the idea of mastery versus ego-orientation. And people who are ego-oriented, tend to condition their own fear, the need for approval, using golf as a vehicle for image management or to get people to approve of you. If you don't play well, you're not getting this very thing that you think you need. So it becomes riddled with anxiety. And so just something simple as, why do you play golf? Mastery orientation or an ego orientation, the way the dominoes fall from that simple question is often the creation of somebody who's fearless or fearful in the game.
Yeah, because I suppose younger players can fall into the trap where they're trying to impress their parents,
their
coaches.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, and they forget why they're actually playing the game in the first place.
Yeah, they forget that it's a game, right? And a lot of times over the years I've had, as I'm sure you have to tell parents, parents say, what's wrong with, what's the problem with my kid? Well, you're the problem. Like it's, they're trying to play golf and have fun and learn and get better. And, what often happens is parents impose their own deficiencies on their children. Maybe the parent didn't achieve his or her goals in high school. And by golly, they're going to make sure that their child doesn't make that same mistake. But and so they impose these externalities, these external pressures on a kid, and it really undermines performance. And I'm not saying there's no role for parents or parents shouldn't have high expectations for their kids. But when a kid gets it into his or her head that the love of their parent is contingent on whether they hit a good golf shot, like that's a heavy weight. My parents only love me when I play well, and whether it's true or not, they subjectively, kids experience the game that way. And so you have to have a talk with parents about unconditional love, and make sure that you can applaud the achievement, but you can't let your kids come to believe that your approval and love for them is dependent on how they play the game of golf. And as crazy as it sounds, to even say it, it happens more than you might think.
Yeah, it gets back to trying to differentiate what the role of a parent is in that respect, isn't it? And where sport comes and where the boundaries are.
Yeah, and it happens in marriages too, right? There are PGA Tour players whose wives, the love is contingent on, and it's crazy to think. It's a crazy thing to think, but that's life in the big leagues. Oftentimes, it's professional sports, it's professional investing, it's love being contingent on achievement. It's not a healthy approach. I will say that.
No. So I'm quite interested in like overconfident golfers, or maybe you talked about the word cavalier before. Do you often find that there are actually some underlying fears there that these type of people have?
Yeah, listen, a lot of times arrogance, this overconfidence, this arrogance that athletes develop, it's interesting because it's a compensation. On the one hand, you need to be super confident to play professional sports. As Nick Faldo says, and Matt Kuchar has observed, and Jack Nicklaus, like golf will try to take your confidence from you. And it's the same in really in all sports, the NFL, the NBA players I've worked with. And so what happens oftentimes is they overcompensate by developing a real arrogance, and they even travel with entourages, surrounding themselves with people that keep telling them how great they are. I always say, I forgive arrogance out of my athletes because sometimes it's just a survival mechanism. Like they need to overcompensate to protect their confidence. I don't particularly like it in my friends or family. I don't think it's an attractive trait, but sometimes athletes need it because confidence, what it does is it acts as a buffer. It's a protector from the intense pressure and enormous pressures that these athletes sometimes carry. So sometimes it's a function of survival. Sometimes it is to mask an underlying insecurity and overcompensation for insecurities. And sometimes it's just a habit, right? Sometimes kids have been brought up, their parents tell them how great they are, and their coach keep telling them how great they are. So by the time they become adults, they just have the habit, the view of themselves that they're great. So there's a lot of different reasons why we see overconfidence. The nice thing about golf, as I said, is it's expository. It tends to expose. There's two types of confidence. There's confidence through arrogance and confidence through humility. And people think that you can't be both humble and confident at the same time. And that's not true. It's actually the best type of confidence is the confidence that is coupled with, real humility.
So yeah, getting back to golf exposing that confidence come arrogance, if you like, in what ways have you seen that happen?
Oh boy. So the way the dominoes fall is overconfidence expresses itself really in two ways. Number one, you don't practice very hard because you think, hey, I'm great, right? If you believe that your greatness is of you and not tied to your work ethic, you tend to get sloppy. And so you don't play very well. And all of a sudden there's cognitive conflict, right? There's a collision between your view of yourself and what the scoreboard is telling you. So that's one mechanism by which it happens. And the other way in which it happens is overconfidence tends to lead to high risk taking. Because you think you're so great, you take on more risk than your game warrants. And so you get punished that way. So as I said, overconfidence will expose it, and it's a mirror there. Now the question becomes, is somebody at that point who's overconfident, can they become self-aware to realize that their problems are rooted in the overconfidence and the arrogance and start to correct that? Because if not, the game will run you out of the game. It'll punish the same thing for a long time.
I really enjoyed the discussion with Gio, and it re-emphasised to me, and I hope it did to you, about knowing your why and why it is so important, especially when you're under pressure, when that pressure gets too much, or when you lose form, you lose enjoyment, perhaps you're injured, you lose confidence. It's so important to know that why. And if you go onto my website, you'll find in the resources section, under youth sport and parents, I've got a checklist, a little tick box exercise there where you can have a look at various different reasons for taking part in sport. And the reason I'm drawing this to your attention is because what I'd like you to do is really have a think about your why, the reasons why you do what you do. Why do you play golf? Why do you play sport? Why do you do what you do in the workplace, in life in general? And the list there, I'm sure is going to be able to help you. It'll help jog your memory. So when you've done that, I would like to think you've come up with 10 reasons. You might even have come up with 20 reasons. And now what I'd like you to do is consider, as Gio mentioned, whether these things actually, these motivations, these things that drive you are task orientated. So that's something that you can go on to master, to feel better at, to become more competent, or whether they're more ego orientated. So whether you might play your sport because your friends do, because you can compete against other people and you feel you're better than them. It might be because you're part of a team and that makes you feel good, or you might have a good relationship with coaches or a not so good relationship with coaches. Ultimately though, if your ego is boosted up and that's the reason why you play a sport, that's why you feel special, it's really helpful to know this, especially through those difficult times, because the likelihood is it's going to shift your focus. For argument's sake, if you're struggling a bit and you're ego orientated, you might be worrying too much about what people are thinking, which means that you're not actually focusing properly on the task in hand, which then can mean that you become more fearful. So for example, a certain shot on the golf course, perhaps a pitch shot, certainly not a full shot, where you've got to go over water or a bunker. And deep down, you worry and you become fearful and a little bit jerky on the shot. What's that all about? Well, if you're ego orientated, it might be because you're worrying about what you look like. You're worrying about going in that bunker or that water and how people will judge you, about holding your playing partners up. So go on, give it a go. Go and draw out that little list and work out whether you're ego-orientated or task-orientated. It can certainly help you when you have some difficulties, and it's going to help you gain more awareness so that you can go on to help yourself. And now I'm going to introduce Chris Paisley, who talks about playing when he's not at his best and having to manage his expectations. So we go back to the conversation when we're talking about winning there. You've mentioned on numerous occasions the best players will be able to win when they're not playing well. And that's potentially something you've struggled with at times. How do you deal with that when you're not playing well on tour and obviously trying to be successful?
Yeah, it's something that I've got a lot better at. Yeah, again, it's something I've talked with Nico and Andy about a lot, is being able to just, when you're not on, is just to make cuts and make a living. And obviously for the top boys, that's not really relevant because the financial side isn't important, and they know they're gonna kind of win majors and that kind of stuff. Whereas for 99% of golfers, it's important to be able to get the most out of yourself when you're not at your best. And so for me personally, I think what the important thing was kind of managing expectations. So past, I found even when I wasn't playing well, I was still trying to hit perfect shots and trying to swing it perfectly, and almost have this stubbornness. Usually I like to hit a nice kind of a soft draw with my driver, and sometimes when my swing's a bit out, I struggle to hit that because I get a bit stuck. And if I try and hit that shot, I can kind of hit it all over the place. But I'd stubbornly try and hit this kind of perfect high draw, even though I kind of didn't really have it in my locker, and that probably cost me quite a few miscuts over the years. And I think what I've managed to do recently is kind of just develop like B and C kind of plans and strategies, and now like if I'm struggling off the tee, for example, or I've kind of worked on stuff like teeing the ball down and hitting a low fade is kind of a shot that I've become a lot better at, and it's kind of hard on your ego. Like you feel like you're hitting a skanky little fade down the fairway and you're losing maybe 15, 20 yards of distance, and it's a hard thing to do, but it's, you know, in certain situations when your game's not quite on, it's a really important skill to have. And you see Tiger do that really well. You know, when he's not on, he used to get his Stinger 2-iron out, and he still kind of shapes the ball. And so a good example recently was Qatar, the last tournament before the lockdown. I was hitting the ball pretty rubbish, and we were on the range on the Tuesday, and I was videoing my swing and trying to work out what was going on, and I was trying to hit these perfect shots, and it just wasn't happening. And I just turned around to Jason, my caddy, and said, like, if I try and go into this week, try and fix my swing and hit perfect shots, I just know we just haven't got enough time to do that before the tournament starts, and I just know I'm going to play crap. So what we're going to do is just every shot, just be really committed to hitting a big shape, no matter what it is. And so we're on the range, and he said to me, all right, now hit like a 10-yard fade with your driver. And I hit this perfect 10-yard fade. And we got a 7-iron out, and he said, all right, now hit a low draw. And I hit a perfect low draw. And we hit all these different shots. And I think just because all of a sudden I'd become focused on the kind of ball flight and the target, that took my kind of awareness away from my swing. And I started to hit all these really nice shots and started to get a bit of confidence. And that's what we did that week out in the course, is just every shot, just be really committed to a certain shape. And I ended up finishing like 7th or 9th or whatever it was that week, from going from playing like terrible, you know, in the build up to the week to then hitting all these really nice kind of shape shots. And you know, when I won in South Africa, I was hitting it dead straight, and I kind of, you know, I wasn't really shaping the ball at all because my swing was in a good place, and where I was looking was where the ball was going. But it's not always like that. And yeah, I think for me, a good strategy when I'm not quite on it is just to hit big shapes. And I just find that kind of takes my focus away from my golf swing and puts it into, it's almost kind of like Bubba type golf, you know, where he just sees a shot and just tries to hit it. And it's not how I like to play all the time, but in certain circumstances, it works really well.
I would imagine if you're trying to be perfect and have the perfect swing, you're potentially going to try too hard. So yeah, you're going to be a little bit tense. Whereas if you're trying to shape it, you're seeing different shots, you're going to be a little bit more relaxed, aren't you? And probably your timing comes back. Yeah,
absolutely. And I've always been someone that enjoys kind of working on my swing and getting it right and stuff. And I think there are times when I've played my best golf and I've been obviously swinging it well, but like kind of been more technically orientated. But there's certain times when, you know, your swing's just not quite there, and you just have to figure out a way of kind of dealing with it. And I think I just learned the hard way. You know, I remember one year at Wentworth, I was kind of not quite on it with my swing, and it's a pretty tough driving course there, and I was standing on the tee trying to, you know, make these perfect swings, hitting high draws off the tees, and it was just really hard for me to kind of commit to the shots, and I ended up just spraying it all over the golf course. And it was just through my I just didn't manage my expectations well enough. I was trying to play perfect golf without a perfect game, you know. And I think a big skill as a golfer is to kind of judge where you're at. You know, there are weeks where you can just kind of freewheel it and hit those neutral perfect shots, and it'll work really well. But there's weeks where it's just not on, and you've got to recognize that and develop kind of strategies and shots to get you around when your game's not there.
So ultimately, you'll have to take the time out to really reflect exactly where you're at and be honest with yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I did well on guitar. I was like, yeah, I'm not swinging it well, but it's fine. You know, we'll hit these shots and figure out a way. And I think just accepting it's a big thing. You know, if you just accept that your game's not quite there, then that kind of allows me anyway to then hit all these, you know, certain shots. And I'm not trying to be the perfect golfer. Yeah, for me, you know, a big part of that was just letting kind of my ego go, you know, and just not trying to be that perfect golfer.
I like that that word acceptance. Yeah, if you can't do that, then you're likely to be reactive, aren't you? And you're likely just to be in sort of fight mode, really.
Yeah.
And yeah, whereas if you accept something, regardless of whether it's the perfect golf swing or whatever, or just things in life, you're generally a little bit calmer and more chilled about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you kind of control the things that you can control. It's a massive skill, really. I'm
pleased to announce a new sponsor for the show, Chimera Sport, who produce a range of sportswear and equipment to enhance performance and recovery, reducing injury occurrences. You'll find on the product section of our website, www.sportexcellence.co.uk/products, access to our own Chimera Sports Shop. I've personally tested some of the garments, and you'll find that the infrared sportswear has been clinically tested too, so it's great for fitness enthusiasts and athletes who want to push harder, go further, and recover quicker. So Chris there re-emphasised the point that every day is a different day, that you're going to feel slightly different. Your state is going to be different, physically, mentally, one day to the next. You might be energetic, pumped up. The next day you might be relaxed. You might get in your own head a little bit. And all this goes on to affect your thinking, the decisions that you make, physiologically, the tension levels in your body. And very importantly for golfers and for different athletes, it goes on to affect your timing. And again, getting back to this thing about mentally tough people. Yes, they do keep going, they do grit it out, but they're also good learners. They recognize when things get tough and they're able to look themselves in the mirror. The better ones, the more successful ones who are mentally tough, back themselves because they're more aware of themselves and they're able to learn from mistakes. So in this case, Chris talked about having a plan B or a plan C, and that's your next task. Consider what is your B game or what is your C game, and make a few notes down. Write down some tactics, some strategies that can help you to kick on during those bad days. So you turn the bad days into average days. You turn the average days into good days, and the good days into great, so that you go on to play your sport, your golf, with more energy and with a nice smile on your face. And certainly I've noticed when I've done this type of work with players that it has helped free them up. This sort of stuff doesn't half help you. Chris talked about when things weren't necessarily going right for him, he would lose some sort of focus on the target, and he may try and become too perfect with his technique. Often what happens is, that's right, people do think too much. They get worried perhaps, and they look in the past, or they get too far ahead of themselves and become a little bit anxious and overwhelmed and look too far in the future. So the brain, the cogs, keep on going. And certainly what Chris mentioned is a really handy practical technique, as well as some mindfulness, trying to stay present in the moment, even singing an upbeat song or a tune that gets the right-hand side of your brain into gear so you feel better in yourself and you get your timing back. And on the subject of learning, I can imagine maybe your brain is a little bit fried now, but I'm going to fry it a little bit more because we've got Andy Gorman coming up now, who's going to talk about putting and some key fundamentals which are grounded in technical as well as psychological, that can really help you learn more about yourself and the qualities that are associated with damn good putters.
Critical one for me. Ultimately, what we're looking for is start line. Start line's a real critical process. Speed, of course, determines what line you're going to choose out on the golf course. But if a player can't start the ball on the line they intended, then we have got a challenge. And I've said it to a number of coaches in the past. I've worked closely with aim point coaches, and if a player can't start the ball on line, there's almost no point in understanding how to read the green. That's not to belittle aim point, or any other green reading process, because ultimately you've got to determine what line you want to hit it on, and speed is conducive to that. So it is often a combination. It's always a combination. But to start with, when a client comes face to face, and I've got Putt Lab data, we look at the differentiation between club face and path, and then what the golf ball's doing in relation to that. And then we try, to determine that during the process of learning, we're going to improve the error between club face and path, which will ultimately straighten the start line. But it may be a completely different process to what we've seen in the past. We may see a player aiming to the right swinging across it, pathing to the left. And, they've got to learn how the aim versus the resulting ball line, start line process is going to, affect things on the course. I then, if I see it's really bad, then I'll oftentimes watch them hit a few shots on the course as well. We'll go out onto the course and, sort of with a more elite player, just watch them play before we make any commitments going forward to any changes. It's like, well, what are we looking at on the course? If they are a right aimer with a slight over the top pull into hitting the golf ball, then, that may be something we have to accept, that this is the process, that this is where this player is. So you have to meet a player where they are, as much as, apply what I would, call an anatomical principle change to so that the body and the club move more efficiently.
In terms of putting, obviously, there you've talked about in effect, the technical elements around improving someone's putting. When it comes down to the pre-shot routine, which I suppose is something I'm probably more interested in at the moment, what would you say are the other key ingredients?
I like to keep it simple, and I say to folk, look, if you can find a different way of doing what I want you to do, then that's fine, providing you tick the boxes. For me, whether you use a line on the ball or not, the ball has a relationship to the target. It doesn't have a relationship to the target until it's landed on the green. So, once a ball has become one with the green, then, a line on the ball, even if it is just to understand your start line capabilities or your pureness of strike, I want to see a start line process. So we line the ball to the target, wherever that aim is, but ball to target, putter to ball. We want the face to be in the player's neutral zone. So if they are, let's just assume, make it a lot easier, it's 0. So everything is perfectly square. Ball to target, putter to ball, body to putter, in that order. And so that the feet are not planted before the club goes in behind the ball. I let the posture that we have built in the process of change, or that the player brings, if it's adequate, and we just see that it's a basic aim issue, wherever it is, we'll let the putter position behind the ball dictate where the body goes. I don't want a player stepping into a ball, setting his feet, and then the relationship of the ball and the target line haven't been established. So, that's why I like to see ball to target, putter to ball, body to putter.
Do you find some players can get stuck, I suppose, on the internal side of things, where they're not looking at the target enough, where they're not, they're not target focused enough?
Yeah, it's kind of, yes, there are a number of players that are like that. And when you point it out to them, the amount of times that you actually, it's like plainly obvious to me and not to the player. And when you point it out to them, they still don't get it. So that's a really critical part of the overcoming of the challenge, and, it's the joy of coaching, how you get a player to see, to identify, to feel, and you're probably then tapping into all the senses, because, they may not be that visual individual. I'm a visual, visual, kinesthetic, auditory, in that order. And that's me. And not everybody's like that. And, to get to understand how a player is, sometimes you do have to have them standing in front, or you have to go through, some questions that just give you a better understanding of where a player is. The use of words will do that, of course.
I like that what you mentioned there about the senses and the visual, kinesthetic and auditory. So supposing I'm a visual learner, how would you build that into that pre-shot routine?
From that point of view, I'm trying to identify that as well during the initial call, which is why it's important for us to sometimes have that visual. But I'll oftentimes, when we don't do that, because it is just a call without any face to face recognition, the words, then, I'm trying to I might be a little bit ambiguous in a statement that I'm saying, but I'll ask, do you hear what I'm saying versus do you see what I mean? And, then that oftentimes triggers a response, which then I can say, right, okay, this is, that kind of player, or if I see a player, and again, they're all different, and you have to respond accordingly. There is no definitive. I wish there was. I've yet to find it. But it's when you see a player whose focus is on visual, but their aim is off, you have to dig in really deep. That for me is like, how can you be a visual individual and you can't see that you're aiming poorly? But that can oftentimes be just down to postural challenges that they've gotten used to seeing what they think is straight. And, so it's one of the anomalies of coaching there is no definitive. I wouldn't say there's a definitive answer, certainly from my perspective, that a player can ultimately then, be taught in one particular way, because you may have to dip into the secondary process in order to be able to trigger their primary learning process. It's the joy. It's the bit that, it's that challenge of the coaching. I don't always like the easy ride. I like to hear that a player is determined first and foremost to put into action and give me the rough ride as the coach to be able to get them out the other side, and identify maybe why we are struggling. Oftentimes I find that a player who struggles to gain good visual awareness of target is struggling with balance to start with. And that becomes a huge challenge, from my point, is then, how do you deliver that message across? And the balance would be subtle. They're not about to fall over. They're just subtly out of balance. And that's affecting their primary processing and maybe even their secondary processing.
That makes sense again as well, because if your balance is out of sync, potentially in your posture, then your eye line could well be, 2 or 3 1 or 2 inches either side, and it's it's a difficult one to. I mean,
I've seen coaches working the process before, sort of setting balls down on lines, but again, that I don't think that's definitive, but it helps, So you'll find a way to get a player to see that they're out of sync, and to get them almost to blindly line up. That's another thing as well relative to the target. Right, there's the target, screen them, right? So, sort of screen their visual perspective of the target and get them to feel the target. And it's amazing how many of them can feel, I'm visual, but, that means that I can also see when I'm not aiming in the right place, but I'm actually using my sensory perceptions to, my balance, my feel through my feet, to actually determine, this is not going to finish where I want it to, which is the bottom of the hole. It's going to finish left or right of the hole. And, I've got a couple of tricks that, I show players, where they're at and why they can actually tell me where they feel it's going to finish relative to the hole. But now it's to get them to trip over themselves and go like, well, why can't you make that adjustment on the course or make the adjustment now? And actually, interestingly, that's where players sometimes without a line on the ball can get into a better setup position from a certain range. Certainly on the longer putts, they get themselves squarer to the target because they think they're seeing what they're seeing, but they're not. And when they get down over the ball, if you put a line on the ball, they tell me that the ball's aiming to the left or to the right. Invariably, it's left, which is a peculiar one, of course, but, and that they're under reading the amount of break that's in there. So it's great to be able to show players that, that they can free aim, far better, because then they're rather than relying on their eyes, which they're thinking they should be doing, they're relying on their feel that's coming through the ground.
In this short bite, Andy talked about the process of learning there, which is something that I'm really aiming to help you with in this episode and with this podcast in general. So I'm going to guess, if you've got this far, that you're a golfer who's listening to this. And he talked about 3 particular technical facets. We had aim, start line, and speed, which can really help putters. He also talked about pre-shot routine, which is more of an interest to me being a psychologist. And he mentioned about ball to target, putter to ball, and body to putter. And in those 3 phases, I'd really like you to ask yourself 2 questions. What am I doing with my eyes? What am I feeling? And the reason I share these questions is because better putters are more concerned with external cues and not so in tune with internal factors or internal cues. So do you find yourself looking at your hands, looking at your feet, your body position? Or do you concern yourself more with the target, seeing the ball go into the hole, or feeling with your hands the ball going into the hole? Are you feeling putting a nice stroke on it, as opposed to thinking about rocking your shoulders or about technical things like your elbow position or anything like that? That's right. Research tells us, and certainly from my applied work, my practical work with golfers, that better players do focus on those external things. They're thinking certainly a lot more about the target than the internal things like the body. So give it a little bit of thought. What do you do? That's what this episode's all about, increasing your self-awareness so that you can make better decisions on the golf course. It might be that you really struggle with the visual side or the kinesthetic feel side. But I'd certainly like you to ask yourself those questions so you can go on to develop your putting routine and, for that matter, your long game routines. So ultimately, you score better. You shoot lower scores, because that's what it's all about. And, please feel free to give me a shout. It's a big passion of mine, golf. It's something I love doing. And I'm working with a number of golfers from recreational up to tour player, dotted all around the world. You can do sessions quite easily on Zoom or Skype or FaceTime. It's not a problem. And on that note, in terms of actually trying to help people lower their scores and do things better, I hope you've really enjoyed this episode. I certainly picked 3 top quality guests whose insights can only benefit your game, as well as benefiting those levels of mental toughness. So yeah, I'm guessing you've learned a little bit more about yourself. And as Gio, Chris and Andy have said, golf is certainly no easy game. And that's one of the reasons why I've put together and recently released an accelerator online course to help you achieve your goals faster, to lower your scores specifically on those bad days when the C, D, E or Z game comes out on the golf course. In the course, it takes around about 60 minutes to complete. That's right, in 1 hour, you'll have a nice range of tactics, tools, strategies that can assist you in your golf, sport and life and give yourself a boost so that you can go on to play with a smile on your face. So go on, check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk/products. This course is available for a short period of time. So get yourself in quick and start lowering those scores. Get that ball in the hole in less shots. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sport psychology resources. The Sport Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.